Hey, what is up, everyone? It's Theguyhere, and welcome back to another episode of Themindhere, the bi-weekly podcast where I talk about new knowledge I've learned, projects I'm working on, and current events. Topics may be random, but I hope that with each episode you can come away with a fresh perspective on the universe. Welcome to all of you who are here for the first time. If you like my content and want to see more, please consider subscribing. Alright, to start off this episode, I'm going to be pretty transparent and talk a little bit about some ideas that crossed my mind as I made this episode and part of last episode too of this podcast. And the thought was maybe if I should wrap this series and put the series on indefinite hold or closing it all together. And this thought came across my mind because it was from a mixture of feelings. And for those of you who don't know, what I'm pretty sure most of you don't know, because I haven't told like a lot of people about how I think, but generally how I think is pretty it's pretty general in a sense, and you might catch that from just how I speak about things and how I analyze different situations. But I like to take an overall broad approach to things, and rather than a super really technical detailed look into things, that's more of like an evidence to support what I've already sort of suspected. I think in more of vague, almost feeling, in terms of like feelings. I have a feeling that this will be a good idea, or I have a feeling that this might work out, or something like that. And I had a feeling that this episode, or not this episode, but the entire series, this podcast, wasn't something that I was enjoying making. In like the past few episodes, they weren't necessarily something I was looking forward to and eager to produce something to share. It was almost sort of I'm doing it just because I was doing it. And I know plenty of people do come across this, plenty of content creators or people that make content, groups that make content, come across that, and sometimes it is a good idea to shut off something that's been going for a while, because you don't want to, for example, a TV series, milk it to the point where the episodes are coming out and you can feel they're forced and they're just not really doing much, even though maybe like the first few seasons were great hits. So it's important to know when a good stopping point is. But I didn't want to make the decision quite yet. It was just sort of an inkling of a feeling at first, and I wanted to investigate it because it's a big decision to drop something that I've been going for. This is now the 45th episode, I believe. So it's been a while, and keeping in mind that every episode is 2 weeks. I space them out with every other week. So that's 90 weeks of continuous uploads of this episode. So that's some dedication that I don't want to go down the drain just yet. So I took a look into this, and I was thinking, okay, so why am I feeling this? I definitely feel that the episodes weren't really, they weren't like progressing in a way that I wanted, and they sort of felt a little forced. I do still enjoy talking about my feelings about things, but it doesn't have the same passion as before. And I mean, for one, it could be just because the beginning portion of anything, when you start off something, is pretty exciting, and then towards the end of something, you also have that feeling of, oh, okay, I need to make sure that I wrap this up in a manner that I'm proud of. But in the middle, things get sort of dull, so that could be a factor that played into this. But I also feel that it was something a little more, and I figured that it was because it was a feeling that I wasn't taking this with the purpose that I had before. I came into this podcast, or I came into podcasting and doing this podcast with a purpose in mind, and that was to improve my speech and my ability to communicate, and also just to have an avenue where I can express some thoughts that I've had that I might otherwise leave on my own, or maybe express it to a few close friends. But I wanted a way to sort of address a broader audience, granted that nobody watches this, for as far as I know, but a few people. And for those of you who do, I appreciate that a lot, and I enjoy sharing my thoughts with you guys. But it was meant for a way for me to sort of give something and express something to the world while also learning something myself. Just the entire process of creating a podcast, knowing how to set up the audio equipment, knowing how to operate the audio equipment, and then video editing, all of that. That's something that I wanted to learn. But I sort of lost that purpose along the way. I wasn't holding on to the purpose of this podcast. So every time I came to this, it was just something that was on my to-do list. It was a project that I had planned the previous episode. After each episode, I planned the next one, or I marked down times where I need to spend time making this. So it became more of, okay, I need to do this thing, but I didn't really have that why. And even if I knew why I was doing this, what the purpose was, it wasn't ingrained in there. It wasn't sincere. So I realized that I needed to find that purpose. And it turns out it might be that maybe the purpose needs to be shifted a little. Maybe I need to find a different purpose. And overall, maybe this entire channel that's been, it's sort of been dead. I've been putting out episodes every other week for this podcast. This is really the only thing that has been going. But maybe I need to investigate a different purpose to make sure that there is a driving force behind this. Otherwise, I really do need to start cutting off things that aren't bringing me purpose. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in this episode. But that's something that I realized. So it was the fact that I didn't have a purpose driving the actions that I was doing. It was more that I had a project management system, or a life operating system, I like to call it, that sort of manages all the different projects that I have, whether they be something that's, for example, for school, different classes, maybe for work, or just personal projects, errands I have to do for family, or just things I wanted to do for myself. I have a system that does this. But with this management system, it's easy to say, okay, I need to do this in this time and sort of plan out when I need to do things. But it can also be easy to sort of forget why I'm doing things, right? It can be just, okay, I need to do this because I planned this out. Okay, sure. I know it's important because I planned it out, but why? I need to keep that in mind. And even if I do have in my project management system, or my life operating system, I'll call it that. I'll keep using that phrase. The systems, I do have places in where I describe my projects. I do have places where I have to specify for myself why, but it's almost become sort of just going through the motions of it instead of actually thinking about, okay, what the purpose of this is. And if there isn't a purpose, should I be taking on this project? So all this sort of applies here, but I just wanted to let you all know that I came decently close to considering wrapping up this episode. My original thought was, okay, maybe after hitting episode 50, I might wrap up this podcast. But as of now, that is not on the table yet, and I want to improve on this podcast, maybe take this a different direction, and even the entire channel, take it a different direction to get it more aligned with a purpose that I have more passion, I can put more passion behind into the work that I'm doing. And I've talked a little bit about this with this podcast already in this episode. And also with the past few episodes, I've sort of talked about the low point that I've sort of been feeling. It's persisted, so I don't know if I can call it a low point. It's sort of a plateau that I've fallen into, correlated with this pandemic, but not necessarily caused by it. It could be a whole host of factors. But I do want to touch up a bit about this and some realizations, some areas I want to improve on, and some possible avenues I can take to possibly get out of this. So it's a low point where I feel that a lot of things that I've been doing, it's like what I talked about with the beginning of this episode about not feeling like this podcast had a lot of meaning. It felt like my life and the actions that I was taking weren't having a lot of meaning. I wasn't making a lot of forward movement and progress, as I was previously used to with, let's say, in high school, when I felt that I was improving quite a bit with my abilities. I was taking on a decent amount of work. It was difficult, but I was challenged, and I felt that I was progressing forward. I was doing things, and I was getting results. I was able to see results, and I felt myself, it felt good to see the improvements coming and knowing that I was still doing things that would reap future benefits. So it was in that stage where All my past work was bringing me results, and I know that my current work will bring me future results. But at this stage, it seems that I've probably exhausted that a little bit. My actions from maybe the pandemic has maybe lent itself to not seeing results, or maybe delayed results that I'm not seeing right now. So I'm at a point where it doesn't feel meaningful with the things I'm doing. And this comes into the what I've realized, that the distinction I need to make with how we live our lives. I feel that my mindset, my approach to living life has slowly drifted towards the more passive side, taking life as a spectator sport per se. And you may ask, how would you manage to get yourself into a situation where you treat life as a spectator sport? I mean, you live your own life, right? You can't just sit back in your bed. I mean, I guess you could sit back in your bed and sort of just live your life that way. It won't be pretty long. It will be a pretty boring life. You might not live very long, but you could do that. But I'm not referring to sort of like a vegetative state. I still feel like I still am doing things that most of you might consider as living life actively, but I don't consider it as such. I consider it as just sort of going through the motions of life, things that I've sort of set in place for myself already, processes that have worked for me in the past, that were bringing me results, but at this point, it's not doing so. And I'm just going through the sort of processes and the actions that I would have been doing when they made sense. So it's just sort of on repeat. I feel like I've been living as a zombie, living passively through life, doing things without really knowing why I do them, without really putting a sort of a meaning and getting something out of it. So living life passively for me is when I go through an action, say maybe like taking on some projects, or maybe going through schoolwork. If I'm not, say, gaining some strong insight from this, if I'm not able to reconnect the knowledge that I've learned with previous knowledge that I've learned from various other sources, if I'm not able to take these notes and solidify them, consolidate them in a way, and apply them in a way that makes it apparent that this is useful, for example, I don't consider that as very active participation in life, in schoolwork. And for most of my other projects that I've been sort of doing, I have been feeling that it's sort of just going through the motions of doing the project, so they haven't been very effective, or I don't feel like I've been accomplishing them efficiently. I've definitely, the timelines have to be pushed back, and not because I've been taking on a lot, it's just I haven't been very efficient with my time. But so one could always say, like, okay, the problem is you're not being efficient with your time. How do you be more efficient and more productive? But I don't think that was the root problem. The root problem, I believe, was that I sort of came into a state where I took things sort of passively, doing things almost for the sake of doing it because I knew it worked in the past, but I didn't have a purpose or a why driving me forward in a direction, and constantly looking for improvements for ways to take an exponential growth pattern. So that is something that I realized that I need to take into play. The activeness of how I take on things in my different projects I'm doing, maybe having a purpose, a genuine sense of purpose, rather than something that I just write down. I'm doing this because of this. No, I have to feel it. Again, this is something that's important to me, is that I have to feel that I've been making progress. I have to feel that this is something that I'm passionate about in order for me to truly know that I've succeeded, or to truly know that I've hit a sweet spot, that this is going in the direction that I want. So with this distinction of active and passiveness, of course, I do want to improve on this and take a more active approach. But what things am I doing? What ideas am I instilling in myself? What actions am I taking to get off of the more passive route and go towards a more active route? Well, first, it's to recognize why I'm doing things, right? It's to, okay. So before any of that, I have to recognize that it's okay to be human. It's okay to not be in a state where I like it. It's okay to be making persistent mistakes and know the mistakes that I'm making and still make them. It's okay for that to be happening. Because if you're not okay with it, if you're not okay with who you are or what you've done, then it's very hard to work with them, right? It's very hard to work with someone you don't like. So if you don't like yourself, it's very hard to work with yourself to improve yourself. So you have to get into a mindset where it's okay for that to happen, but we recognize that we need to move forward. That it's okay that you've made mistakes, but it's not okay to continue doing this, and it's important to be taking actions. So being okay, recognizing it's okay to be human. That's the first step, and that's something that I'm still consolidating with myself, but it's something that I feel is important. And that's something that maybe will help you guys in this process. But so that's the first step that I'm taking. The second step that I'm doing is making sure that there is a purpose with everything I'm doing. So going through everything that I have through my my life operating system, the projects that I'm doing, the commitments that I'm taking on, are they purposeful? If so, make sure that I genuinely feel the purpose and the drive behind it. And this doesn't necessarily have to be correlated with maybe an overall overarching purpose. Say like, oh, I want to be the one that develops a cure to cancer, right? Not necessarily something that's super overarching. You just have to feel that your inner compass is aligned with this. Your morality takes you in this direction, that it's something that appeals to you. You don't have to put a finger on exactly where you have to go forward. And frankly, I used to think that I did, but I'm sort of questioning that, and I'm sort of working my way to find a better one, perhaps. But you don't need to do that. What I do think is more powerful is that innate feeling that this is something that's the right direction. Once you get that feeling, once you've established that, then it's something that's really truly worth pursuing. Otherwise, I don't think it's necessary. And it's hard, but some things that might have seemed important, it's something that I'll cut out because it just wasn't bringing benefits. So making those tough decisions to cut out things that aren't important while also reestablishing purpose is going to be the second step. And then the third step is to just act upon this, to lay out a plan of what I want to accomplish, to set some targets for myself, making sure to set some targets that are bringing me towards my goal, but they're in steps that I can take. Keeping in mind the current position. So at the current state, I feel that my discipline has sort of dropped. So I need to make sure that I'm setting targets to rebuild that discipline, but not in a way that would disappoint myself and discouraging me from keep trying if I don't hit these targets. So for example, I used to be able to go to sleep at maybe like 10 o'clock. I was an early sleeper. But at this point, I'm probably averaging maybe about at midnight or something. So I want to, let's say for the next week, I want to make sure that I'm sleeping at least before 11. And if I don't hit that, I don't want to be overall super critical. I do want to, however, take an approach that I can look at where I'm currently, what is happening, why I didn't meet that target, and take a curious approach to, why did this happen? Instead of how did you let this happen? And in a manner that's sort of accusatory to yourself, ask in a manner that's curious, in a way that's genuinely curious as to why this happened, and finding a way to work with yourself. And this is also a good approach, I think, to apply when you deal with other people, but starting with yourself, I feel like it can be an easier starting point. It offers a lot more room for flexibility to experiment and refining. So I like to experiment mindsets, models on myself. So this is one that I think would be a good way to approach getting myself to go into a better state. All right. So that's a way to bring myself out and go towards that more active path. And once I see that, once all of this is starting to kick into play, executing on it every day, I need to have a way to look back and reflect what progress, making sure I celebrate the progress that has happened. So making sure that, so instead of comparing down the timelines to the tremendous progress that I've had before and being disappointed, I need to be able to reset that a little bit, saying, okay, from the starting point to now, what has the progress been? That's good. I've made progress, but here is where I tripped up. How can I improve on that to make better future progress? It's important that I don't get hung up in places, in the mistakes that I've made in the past, because they've already happened. So to sort of beat myself down for what's already happened doesn't make sense. The best thing I can do with past mistakes is to never make them again in the future, or to make better choices in the future. So that is the sort of final step, but a final step not as in like a linear step that or algorithm that you take. It's sort of a repetitive process, right? You keep going through the process of reflecting on yourself, identifying areas of improvement, but also celebrating accomplishment, and then setting new goals, new milestones, and continuing to move forward. Some of this might sound sort of obvious. It might be something that has been discussed by others in a manner that makes more sense or is more viable. And if so, do follow that. But these are some initial inklings of ideas for how I want to approach to making sure that I live life not as a spectator sport, but as a participant in my own life, making sure that I write the story that I am going through. Now, enough of all that talk with things that I've been feeling. I want to give a little with some perspective that I think would be good for you guys to take into, and something that I feel would be beneficial to society if this is something that people paid more attention to. So shift the focus a little bit away from myself, although I do want to, every time that I do talk about things that are happening to myself, it's to promote a sort of transparency, to let people know the process, but also to flesh out ideas to move forward and let everyone sort of participate. But this is sort of something that's totally off, not from myself, just something that I've noticed and something I want to sort of add into. And that is the ability of people to disagree with respect. So this concept is about recognizing that other people are autonomous individuals that have their own thoughts, mind processes, mindsets, thought processes. And because of that, we need to respect their humanity. We should be able to respect that they are their own person and that they have their own different feelings. We should be able to respect them, but also be able to respectfully disagree with some things that don't fit ours. It's okay to have that disagreement. We don't all have to agree on something. But it's not okay to be disrespectful to someone because they disagree. Even if it's something like fundamental to your beliefs, we still have to, I feel like, be able to respect that they are their own individual. And even if they don't treat you with that same respect, maybe still instill that respect on them, and perhaps they may return it someday. After all, if your policy was to respect people who respect you, then you could quickly escalate into a situation where someone did something that you perceived as disrespectful. You stop respecting them. Now they have a legitimate reason to not respect you. Legitimate, as in they were taking the same policy you were. And now pretty soon you are enemies for something that was pretty much inadvertent, which was going to happen in some sense. So that's something that needs to be aware of. And this thought came into mind when I was reading a book from written by Kim Stanley Robinson called The Green Mars, part of the Mars trilogy. It's it's about futurism and Martian society, how humans might colonize Mars, and the different cultural implications, technological implications, economic, all of the juicy humanities and technology stuff combined into one novel. It's pretty fantastic, and I encourage you to check out this author. But the line or the phrase that was there, since there wasn't really a quote from this, but it was the phrase equality without conformity. And this is the idea that you can treat everyone with an equalness without needing everyone to conform to something, right? So that's like saying, okay, you can be all equal human beings without needing to use the same culture or have the same set of moral values, right? So a good, I guess, counter or a good counter example of this would be saying that, okay, we should all be respectful and we should all, do the right thing, or something sort of platonic like that. But then also saying that, but in order to do so, you need to take on this culture because this is the most equal of cultures, and your culture is not equal, therefore I cannot treat you equally. That's not equality without conformity. That's conformity from equality, right? We want to be able to treat everyone as equals, as human beings, without needing to conform to what we believe is the best. Because chances are it might not be the best, or it might be the best for you, but not for someone else. The best is relative to people. So making sure that we can disagree with respect, and bringing it back to the topic of this, disagreeing with respect is the ability to recognize the differences and the disconformity. I don't even know if that's a word, but like the lack of conformity between people, but also the ability to treat them as equals. That's the respect part. But the disagree part is the conformity or the lack thereof. So just making sure that if you come across someone as perhaps toxic, perhaps acting in a way that you don't believe is even very humanly, the need to respect them as a human being while also disagreeing is something that I feel that is not something that would obviously be something that, I don't know, news media might catch up on. It doesn't make a good headline when someone's treating another person respectfully, unless it's part of that pre-programmed segment of like happy feeling at the end of a program of a news show. It doesn't come up in the middle because it just doesn't make good profits. And YouTube videos generally pick up on things that are more negative, where people are toxic and acting super wild, rather than being able to push someone back and say, hey, it's okay, I know you're mad at me, or I know you disagree in a way, and that's fine. So being able to disagree with respect is something that I don't see a lot, and maybe it's just because of the portrayal that's been seen in the media and what's been selected. But if people take on more of this, I feel like that might be a way to improve situations in society. It might be a good way to live life. All right, thank you all so much for watching this episode of Themindhere. If you enjoyed this episode, or even this podcast, if you found this inspiring, insightful, or just in any way joyful, and you feel like this might be something where someone else might benefit from, please share this with them, because this helps grow this community, and it helps me. It means a lot to me if you do so. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate the support you all have given me throughout this process. Take care, stay humble, and I'll see you all in the next episode.